Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your testimony. And I'm trying to glean what is the path forward here from both your testimony and your responses. You know, Mr. Weary, I looked at your testimony in advance of the hearing, and I was struck, as you seem to be, that the complicated reality on the ground is one that has been centuries in the making. Transactional society, hundreds of militias, competing ethnic and tribal affiliations, very aggressive regional loyalties that on any one day can include homegrown and foreign-born radicals, neighbors simply seeking to defend their homes and families, gangs stealing oil and wealth and engaging in gratuitous violence, tribes and states of cold and hot wars against one another for generations, regional actors exploiting or protecting natural resources like oil and water. It's amazingly complicated. And so what I am trying to glean and looking at the reality of and the summary of both of your answers to some of the questions, the fragmentation means that there are literally hundreds of different groups that potentially you have to get to buy in, which is more or less the same situation we faced right after the 2011 military action. So what are the tools within our disposal and that of the international community in our arsenal of tools that could bring this fractious group, or at least the most significant elements of it, together, not only for their interests, obviously they want to continue to be involved and engaged and of importance, I get that, but normally when you bring security elements together, you bring them together in favor of a nation, something that I want to fight for and die for, because I believe that that nation, at the end of the day, represents, you know, the interests of me and anyone else who lives within Libya and in this disparate group. So I'm trying to figure out, what do we bring to bear on these fragmented groups at this point in time to move us in a direction that not only creates the security situation we want, the allies that we want to fight ISIS, which is obviously critical to us, but also to some sense of national government here, because otherwise we've brokered a truce among security groups who are not committed to a national government. Can you sort of like give me some sense of that?
Thank you. You're right to say that it is difficult to bring all these fractured groups together in the absence of an inspirational figure or inspirational government. And unfortunately, the lineup of this proposed government of national unity has done very little to be that inspirational figure. Its media appearances have been abysmal. News of infighting in this 9-member presidential council has actually caused a lot of disaffection. But in practical terms, what are the tools that the international community in the U.S. have? These are very practical. More human resources, even within the UN team, dedicated to security sector arrangements. Throughout 2015, there were only 5-6 people in the UN team trying to forge a consensus or a dialogue between the security units. I think 5 people is a bit too little. There's scope to increase the numbers. It's important for these international advisors and individuals who can support this process of dialogue between the security units to actually be present in the country. One of the problems, of course, you know, is that the embassies are not located in Libya. It is difficult for groups and international advisors to go and meet these military commanders on the ground, because they are on the ground. They're not sitting in a Tunis hotel waiting for a meeting with international interlocutors. But as both Fred proved, and what I'm doing in Libya also proved, you can go into the country, you can sit with these commanders, and that simple fact would help them move towards a process that would head towards unity, I think.
Ms. Weir, you have any comments? I hear that, and that is a facilitation of a conversation, which of course is worthy in of itself, and hopefully, but then what else do we bring other than additional human capital to create that facilitation of a dialogue to bring disparate groups together. I mean, I'm always thinking about what leverage do you bring to the table, or what capital do you bring to the table? How do you incentivize people? And that's what I'm trying to glean. So I appreciate that element of the answer. Do you have any other perspectives?
Well, I think we have to be sort of humble about what leverage we bring. I mean, there is a sort of constituency in Libya that sees the tremendous humanitarian economic costs of this conflict, and I think some of those actors were the ones that started this dialogue. But the parties themselves have to come to this realization that they need to stop. And I think we shouldn't exaggerate the divides in Libya. I mean, this is a small country. Many different families are related. There's interdependence of trade. The expectations of a breakup, I think, are overblown. I do think we need to increase the mandate of the UN in terms of the security front. But I think our guiding principle in the interim is to do no harm. First, do no harm. I mean, the issue where we are today was the result of one faction, in the East undertaking a campaign in the guise of counterterrorism that basically forced disparate Islamist militias and radicals to coalesce and open the door for radicalization. I mean, part of the Islamic State's appeal is because of this factional civil war that was aided by regional actors. And so I think we need to limit the damage from that. But I do think there has to be some humbleness that, the factions themselves have to come to the table before we can force them.
All right, Mr. Chairman.